All right, so we are live now. Can you see live or something on the top? You don't, right?
Hello there. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
Yeah, it looks like we're live.
We are live. All right,
Mhm.
everybody. I'm Philo, and I have my co-host with me, Mahdin. And the topic today that we are going to discuss is it's a very esoteric topic. It's called it's concept of nothingness is the title that uh, we have given it, and it's going to be a conversation about this concept between myself and Mahaden, and touch upon a few different topics. But before that, I think it's fair enough to introduce ourselves. I'm Philo, and uh, this is philosophy is not my mainstream, but intention of doing these streams is to bring these difficult and tough topics to South Asian audience. The first thought was to bring these streams in Hindi, Urdu, and a mix of Bangla because Mahdin has a Bangladeshi background. So that was the earlier thought. But for the starters, this stream is gonna be purely in English, and we're probably gonna do something like translating into Hindi, Urdu, and Bangla later on, or we might change our whole game and do intermix all these languages in a single stream. Madin, would you like to introduce yourself?
Hi there. Yeah, thank you, Philo, for that. I am Mahdin, as you guys can see. I am British born. Have a background in law and philosophy. I've studied philosophy as a partially as a formal subject at a higher education level. And I'm just very interested by philosophy and so on. So I wish to contribute to a few streams to help a few others, perhaps like-minded folks and people who are just laymen in the topic who just want to think about these things, and help them think about these things in a formal way, perhaps. But yeah, so I have a keen interest in education as well, and I thought, some of the thoughts that I have in my private bunker is probably more helpful to be exposed to the public so that we can have like a collaborative discussion. But yeah, that's about it, Philo.
Yes, thanks, Mahadin, for that wonderful introduction. One thing I want to put out over here as well, and I'm pretty sure you agree to it as well.
Hmm.
The intention, at least from my side, I'm pretty sure that Mahadin, you are much well versed in philosophy than I am. So one intention from both of us, if I can say from your side as well, will be not only to shed out whatever all we know, but at the same time learn new things from our audience as well, if the need be. It's quite possible that we have we get some of the concept incorrectly or do not understand or we misspoke or whatever, and so the audience is free to come on the stream and correct or even put their own thoughts if they want to. So that's a little bit of addendum to what we said earlier. Uh, what do you think, Mahadin, about that? Right?
Yeah. I do see this as a project in construction, and it's something that is we hope to build upon with, perhaps inviting more guests, more people who have a curiosity and intrigue about philosophy, and not and people who may be experts on the subject as well, academics and so on. It would be very interesting to like speak to people and get their contributions, and people who might be watching us, our fans, and so on. None of us claim to be experts. We all know so and so. We all have limits, and philosophy is one of those subjects. Even when you are an expert, you can be very wrong about it. We invite and welcome the audience to make their contributions. We want to hear from you. We want to know what we've done wrong and what we can improve upon. And maybe if you make a very, very strong argument, maybe it'll be good for one of the viewers to even come on the show and we can have a discussion. We just want to want it to be like a classroom almost, where we can discuss things, or a coffee room where everybody can come along and have their discussions. Yeah.
Sure. Yes. So the way today's stream is structured is we're gonna have I've divided it into 5 categories. We have actually divided it into 5 categories, and it might happen that we might jump around a little bit, but we'll try to go in the sequence that within that list. So we're going to go through the definition of nothingness. Point 2 is going to be, can nothingness really exist, or is it just a concept? Point number 3 is, what can be known about nothing or nothingness, and what are its attributes and properties, if it has any attributes and properties. We'll discuss whether it can have attributes and properties. And then we are gonna talk a little bit differently on the subject of can something from, and these topics relate more to the concept of physics rather than metaphysics, or it's at the boundary of physics and metaphysics as to, can something arise from nothing, can something scientific investigation or not. And then lastly, and this is a point that we're gonna discuss and see whether it's thinking about this is even right or not, is whether nothingness implies necessitarianism or not. And Mahdin, take it away, please.
Yeah. So the first part of that is how do we define a nothing? So before we just quickly answer that question, let's just think about why we're thinking about this in the first place. So historically, and since the beginning of time, since the beginning of man, really, people have asked, why is there something rather than nothing? Why are there things? Why are there trees? Why are there, the sky? Why is there planets? Why are people? Why do these things exist rather than just a blank? And it's a mind-numbing thing. A lot of people have been contemplating it from the beginning of time, and they've never really got to any sound answers. And that's what provokes the thought, like, why is there something rather than nothing? But then we need to ask, what are we talking about? We need to really say then, what is something and what is nothing? So we need to define these terms. So one of the ways to define it, a lot of people have done, is to contrast it with the things that we know exist. So something, well, what do we mean by something? Something is, for example, the phone that I'm holding in my hand, or the toilet, the pair of glasses, the computer, trees. These are things. So what is nothing? The nothing is the absence.
Something can be a matter or energy, right? These are things, I mean,
Yeah. So
at least in the physical world, these two things are always, if you can invoke Einstein in between, and you can say matter is energy, energy is matter.
Exactly.
So these are two physical things, but you can add maybe dark matter as well.
Yeah. Arguably, those things boil down to matter, for example. So the question arises: why do those things? Why do those things exist apart from nothing? Well, what is nothing? Well, nothing seems to be the negation of matter, atoms, chemistry, biology, physics, etc. The negation of it, the absence of it, and that's how we kind of conceive of the concept of nothingness. But I just want to distinguish, because that's not the only definition of nothing.
Exactly.
Sometimes when we talk about nothing, we say stuff like, for example, nothing is in the bag. Okay, and what we mean by that is slightly different. What we mean is there is nothing in the bag that usually would what we usually would expect to be in the bag, like shopping items, like groceries, etc.
So
But
this is
obviously,
this is
yeah,
more of a colloquial definition of nothing, right?
exactly.
I mean,
Yeah, that.
colloquially, we would like to say, "Oh,
Yeah,
it doesn't matter. It's nothing. Nothing happened,"
yeah,
right?
exactly. So
Or
what it
there's
is,
nothing inside that
yeah,
fridge, or there's I didn't see anybody inside,
yeah,
or
no,
nothing is present in the class, or whatever, right? So that's a colloquial language, but this philosophical nothing is very different. So please go ahead.
absolutely, yeah. The colloquial nothing just is asking for to know what's inside a particular item, or like you said, a fridge. If there's nothing in the fridge, we don't necessarily mean there is literally nothing in the fridge, because there's obviously oxygen in the fridge, there's nitrogen in the fridge, there's the contents of the fridge, the materials of the fridge, there's matter, there's physics in the fridge. But we just mean that the fridge, which typically would have items, is empty and devoid of those items. So we're not asking a deep philosophical question when we or answering the deep philosophical question about what nothing is, or
Right.
etc. It simply applies on a social and linguistic level of acceptance in society, where we just are asking for what we would usually mean to be in those things. But
Yeah,
the
it's
philosophical nothing.
it's lack of those things that we would usually find over there, kind of, in a sense.
Yes, yeah. But
So
when we say philosophical nothing, we mean something different. We don't just mean that. What we mean is that we really mean we're really trying to define a nothing, which is the absence of not just the things in the bag, but that typically will be in the bag, but absence of oxygen, absence of nitrogen, absence of the underlying physics, and even reducible, and further reducing down to that is absence of
it's
quantum mechanics.
almost
Yeah,
absence of everything that we know of, pretty much.
yeah,
Almost
yeah.
everything that we know of.
Yeah. And the funny thing is, yeah, it is even the absence of space and time. Okay,
Right,
and
exactly.
yeah, and when we try to conceive of that, what we're trying to do is, well, think about it this way: when we try to conceive of nothing, we might close our eyes and go, "Oh, there's a black space." Yeah, black space with nothing in it. There's no atoms, there's no particles, there's nothing in it. But that's still not nothing, because we're trying to say even that black space, that three-dimensional space or four-dimensional space, or whatever you want to call it, even space doesn't exist. Now try and imagine that. Now that would be nothing. Um,
Right, right. But
yeah.
you probably are even going farther than that. I mean, even if you remove space, probably there is a quantum field we are talking about. Um, you know,
Mm.
maybe
Hmm.
go even before the Big Bang, right? And
Exactly.
whatever is there, I mean, see, these words probably lose their meaning when you talk of something like Big Bang or even before, because you don't even know what the word means, what the word before means, when you're
Yes.
talking about an event prior to Big Bang, because you don't have time and space before that. So so what I'm trying to say here is, any field, if there's something like that existing prior to Big Bang, we are talking that even that is something. So one of the major problems defining nothing is you don't really have an idea as to what is nothing, because in a sense, when you think through it, when you say can nothing really exist, is kind of a problematic statement in itself, right? Because it seems to not really make any sense, because uh, in a literary sense, basically you are saying, can a negation exist? Because the moment you say that something exists, you you imply that it exists. But when you say can nothing exist, and if nothing exists, that means it exists, something exists, right? So can nothing exist, right? I mean, it kind of seems like what do you call, a cat is trying to catch its own tail. I don't know. I mean, probably that analogy is not a really good one, but it's kind of seems like a circular thing in a sense.
Exactly.
So
Yeah, a lot of philosophers thought that as well. I think Parmenides, a Greek philosopher, had suggested that whenever we try and like conceive of something to exist, or to prove its existence, it exists as a positive entity, obviously, right?
right,
It has some sort of dimensions, it has a structure. It exists as like a concrete object that we can go and detect, etc. But when we, but when we try and think about something like a nothing, that's the absence. That's the absence of entities, positive entities. So
right.
the weird thing is, if there exists something like a nothing, we would never be able to go and find it, because it's not a positive entity to be detected. Because if you do go and detect it, then is it nothing? Because if it's detectable, if you can measure it, can find it, quantify it, it's
Then
not
it
nothing.
exists. Yeah, it's not nothing anymore, right?
Yeah, and furthermore, there's this concept called the observer effect. But if you are a person who enters into a field of nothingness, it would no longer be nothing, because
Right.
now you are,
I mean, any
yeah, interfering with this nothing, and therefore is something.
right, any
So
probe that you put over there is kind of an observer, and then you probably lose. I mean, so the even if you say that okay, this probe has found nothing, but then
mm,
in its totality you lost the meaning of nothingness, because you now have something that's becoming a probe to this nothingness basically. So you lost nothingness because it's not absolute nothingness anymore, because there is something that's trying to find this nothingness. So
yeah.
yeah, I mean, you're right about that any observer introduced into finding nothingness, how do you even go about finding nothingness? That's a
Yeah,
question,
yeah,
but that's a topic that I think we have listed down in the list. Basically, what is
yeah. I mean, there was once upon a time somebody, a group of philosophers called the logical positivists, who thought, for example, for a statement to be meaningful, it has to be at least observable or analytically sound. Okay,
right,
and the logical positivists were epistemologists. They were only concerned about what we can know, and rather, and not whether or not that thing is actually real. That's a bit of a technical distinction. For example, we might know the tree exists, for example, through observation, but whether or not the tree is real, independent to our senses, is something we can never truly know ontologically.
right, right,
And the logical positives just cared about whether or not we can have statements that we can go and measure at the very minimum, whether or not we're brain in vats like the Matrix.
hmm,
That was like an irrelevant question that the logical positivists thought that we can never answer. So what they thought was, all statements has to be at least in principle observable. So, for example, uh, let's say the planet Pluto, or whether or not it's a planet or it's not a planet, I don't know. Let's just hypothetically assume Pluto is a planet.
right,
At least, although nobody has explored Pluto, in principle, it's observable.
right,
We can one day design, the technology necessary so that we can deploy ourselves there, and so on, and etc. So that's in principle observable. The logical positive would say the concept of a nothing, in principle, is not observable because of the observer effect, because it doesn't make sense to conceive of a situation where we can actually come in contact with a nothing. Yeah,
right,
so it fails the first test for the logical positives, which is that it's not observable. But then the logical positives say it still might be a meaningful statement if it's analytically sound. So what the logical positivists said was there's certain things that are analytically sound that you don't need to necessarily figure out through empirical observation. So, for example, a married bachelor cannot exist.
hmm,
And the reason for that is but just through analysis using our brains. We don't need to see it and explore it. We can just conceive of the concept of a married bachelor and look at the terms a married bachelor. Well, to be a married bachelor, it means that you're going to be simultaneously married and be unmarried.
Right.
Yeah, but that's a contradiction in terms. Yeah,
Right.
so the logical positive would say we can't observe a married bachelor, and it's not conceivable through analytical thinking. We can't conceive of it because it's contradictory. Therefore, we can dismiss it entirely as a question that we can ever answer. It's not meaningful.
Right.
It's meaningless.
So the same applies to this definition as well. Is what you mean, right here?
Arguably, yeah. For example, like we just discussed initially, that we might not be able to observe and discover nothing.
Right.
Yeah. But maybe we can conceive of it, and here's where we make the distinction between what we can observe and what we can try and conceive. So perhaps, although we might not be able to ever observe a nothing,
right,
maybe we can still conceive it being possible that nothing can exist. One way, let me just give you an analogy. Although we can never find out what is beyond our senses, so we perceive a tree, right? I observe a tree, yeah? Now the question is, does that tree exist without the human brain? Because remember, when we see the tree, the light waves come into my eye, and I process it, and it forms an image in my head. But the question is, does the tree exist independent to my senses? Well, arguably, you can never answer that question. Because
yes, you cannot answer. But the question is actually, and this is something that I have thought over, and probably would be nice to run this thought through your brain, is doesn't it depend on the fundamental? You won't ever be able to answer that question unless until you know what the fundamental reality is, because all you're doing is whatever the observer is looking at, he's able to conceive that concept based on his own reality. So a tree is a tree because of an observer. Otherwise, it doesn't exist, right? I mean, sans any observers, a tree isn't a tree.
Well, here's the thing. Well, what the logical positivists did was to say that although you might not be able to answer the question whether the tree exists independent to your senses, right? We can conceive, rationally speaking, through our reasoning, that it's at least possible that the tree exists without any observer. Why? For example, you can conceive of a large, a pink flying donkey. Now, does a pink flying donkey exist? No, because we don't have any animal that fits that description in our biological knowledge of the animal kingdom, and we don't know of any extraterrestrials who fit that description. But we can at least imagine a pink flying donkey. Yeah. On the other hand, can you imagine a square triangle? No, because a square has 4 sides, a triangle has 3 sides, and it's not possible to imagine a square that is also simultaneously a triangle. So I'll give you 2 examples. I can see 2 examples. The first example is something that we can conceive. The second example, and at least possible, logically possible. The second one is logically impossible. What the logical positivists thought that although we can never observe a tree independent to our senses, we can at least imagine a world where a tree exists without any observers, no humans, no inhabitants, but the tree exists independent to thoughts. Right? Here's a tree.
Right.
Yeah. There's no contradiction, unlike a square triangle. Right?
So the question I have is. Why is I mean, it's of course. Do you then let me pull this conversation back to
Whilst you're doing that, let me just connect this back to why I'm talking about this. So the question arises: although we can never observe a nothing, question is, can we conceive at least a possible world where nothing can exist? Just like the possible world where trees can exist without an observer, can we think of a possible world where there's nothing and there's no observer as well. We may not be able to ever detect it, just like we can't detect a tree independent to our senses, but we can at least imagine that it's logically consistent and not contradictory and conceivable. Yeah, we may never discover it within our lifetimes or ever, but it might be logically possible that a world of where nothing exists. That sounds weird, yeah. So
Yeah,
the question is,
the problem I
yeah,
have with that,
mm,
even let's call it a thought experiment, right? And
yes,
if we have this concept, um, if we can imagine a concept that a world exists where there is
mm,
nothing, right?
mm,
Doesn't that concept itself, having that concept itself, is negating that existence of nothingness? Basically,
yeah, yeah,
in a world,
yeah,
not even the concept should exist, right? Not even abstract
yeah,
concept should exist, right? So
yeah,
even this
yeah,
concept of having something existing should negate that existence in itself. So what I'm getting at is, um, I think probably I'm not agreeing with logical positivists. Basically, here is I'm saying probably this is something that you can't, even if you can imagine, it's almost impossible. It's like that contradiction, that square triangle, basically, or
yeah, yeah.
married
Well,
bachelor.
well, keep in mind the logical positivism's methodology here is only helping us evaluate which statements are
Or
meaningful and which,
non-contradictory, yeah,
yeah, and which statements
non-contradictory.
are not meaningful. So
Right,
a married bachelor, you can't observe a married bachelor, nor can you conceive of it logically.
right,
Yeah, yeah. A square triangle, you can't observe a square triangle, nor can you conceive it about it logically. On the other
right,
hand, a pink unicorn, you might not be able to observe it, but in principle, it's observable. Yes, in
right,
principle, for example, you might be able to observe it. There's no, yeah. Furthermore, there's no contradiction. Unlike a square triangle, unlike a married bachelor, there's a contradiction in its concept. A pink unicorn, on the other hand, you can, in principle, observe it, even though all of our science and physics suggest nothing like that exists. But in principle, maybe one is testable. Yeah, maybe one day we can discover something. Yeah, because analytically speaking, there's no contradiction in a pink unicorn. There's no in its concept. Unlike the square triangle, there's no contradiction. Now,
right.
what the logical positivist yardstick is doing is distinguishing between meaningful statements like the pink uniform versus meaningless statements like a square triangle or a married bachelor.
Right. So
So,
it's only based where the contradiction is happening. They are saying, okay, probably can't exist, but at the same time, any meaningful statement could be expected to have manifestation in reality. Right?
yeah,
Is
yeah.
that true?
Well, if it's contradictory, then no. It has to satisfy both. Yeah, it has to be in principle either observable, but
Hmm.
sorry, in principle observable and analytically non-contradictory. Yeah.
Right.
So me and you have conceded that nothing might not be, observable. But is it analytically analytically contradictory, or is it non-contradictory? That will help us dismiss it as a meaningful statement. Yeah. So the logical positivists don't say, for example, nothing is analytically non-contradictory. It is for us to grasp. And that's what I'm suggesting to you, that we need to think about it now, even though we might not be able to observe it.
Right.
Um, is it a concept that makes sense? And that's when your criticism comes in. Yeah, that doesn't repudiate logical positivism. All it does is it repudiates this particular statement of nothing, as a
Right.
proposition.
Right. Okay.
You
Okay.
know,
I see the point.
yeah. So your criticism, do you wanna express it again? Sorry.
No, so what my thought was that when we talk about nothingness, does it should not encompass any abstract objects or even concepts as well. So when you said we can think or imagine about a world where nothingness exists, right? And this
Mm,
was a thought experiment. And I said, as soon
mm,
as you think about a world that uh, that concept in itself negates the thought that there could be nothing, basically, because that thought in itself, that concept in itself, is negating that
Yeah,
thought that nothing could exist. And
yeah.
that's my thought basically behind it, because
And I would, yeah.
in an absolute nothing, not even concepts could exist, basically.
Yes, and I think I agree with you because I do think it's like a married bachelor or a square triangle. Just
Right.
like you said, if you imagine a nothing, yeah. So what do we mean by this? It means nothing is a big empty void, devoid of everything, including
Right.
concrete objects like physics and abstract
Strict
objects
objects,
like
right.
like like the laws of logic, even mathematics, even 2 plus 2 doesn't equal four here,
Yeah.
yeah,
There is
etc.
no two, there is no plus, there is no four,
Yeah,
there's nothing, absolutely nothing.
exactly. So one of the problems with that is, like David Hume suggested, like we can conceive of a nothing, just like we close our eyes and we imagine a black space, right? But
Yeah, but isn't the act of imagining itself is negating that thought of nothingness, right?
kind
That's
of,
what I
kind
think. My objection is to that uh, that concept itself. Whether that concept comes by the way of imagining or by the way of a thought experiment, however you wanna pose it. But anyways, sorry. Go ahead.
I wouldn't say that the fact that you're thinking about it through a thought experiment negates it. That part doesn't, I think. That's just the means that you're using to think about a concept. The fact, the square triangle can't be a square triangle, and it's a meaningless statement,
Because
not
of its
because,
properties, right? Yeah,
but
because
there's a
of
property, exactly, it's the properties in the thought experiment, but that's not
okay,
the fact that you're doing a thought experiment. And similar
okay,
vein, the concept of nothing might be contradictory. What I was saying about David Hume is that he tried to conceive of a black space, but I think that's wrong because when you try to conceive of nothing, we have to also imagine that black space not existing because we're talking about even space-time not existing.
right, right,
So this means, can we do that? Can we conceive of space-time not existing? So when we try to imagine nothing, we still imagine a blank
right,
space, a
right,
canvas.
right,
But we have to try and imagine that not existing, and we can't even do that. Very similar to a square triangle. We can't even
right,
conceive of a square triangle or a married bachelor. It's
right,
mind-boggling. We can't imagine a square being a triangle or a triangle being a square. It just can't be
right, right,
conceived. And that's the
right,
reason why it's meaningless. Similar to nothing, then. The reason why it's meaningless is because we just can't even imagine even the black space not existing, which means there's a
right.
problem there right from the
Yeah.
beginning.
Yes.
Yeah. Another reason is, um, if we imagine a nothing, we're saying that it's devoid of everything. But if nothing is devoid of everything, yes, then it also is devoid of, let's say, the law of conservation of mass, thermodynamics, things that prevent things from happening. For example, a the salt won't dissolve into the water and become an aqueous liquid solution unless it's been there for a while because of the laws of chemistry. There's things that bound it and cause things to happen in particular ways. A giraffe won't pop into existence out of nowhere. Giraffes are born through reproduction. Even those
Right.
laws don't exist. If there's no laws that exist, there's nothing to prevent nothing from being inherently unstable, which means nothing should be infinite in potential. Can you see what I'm saying?
Yeah,
Because
nothing
there's no
has no
laws.
potentiality and no,
Yeah.
it shouldn't have any potentiality. Basically, it's devoid of any potentiality as well. Is that what you're getting at?
Well, kind of. What I'm trying to paint a picture of a contradiction eventually with the remark that you made, because in one hand, if there's nothing, then there are no laws, there's no rules, in which case everything should be possible. Weird, right?
Yes,
But at the same time,
that's an absurd idea.
yes,
It's a very
absurd idea.
absurd
Yes,
idea.
Yeah. At the same time, there's another version of nothing where, when we
But
think about nothing, it should be devoid of all potentiality. Because if
right,
it has any
that's the
potential for
contradiction
anything
I'm
to happen,
facing.
sorry?
Sorry
Yeah.
to interrupt you. So that's the contradiction I'm facing. And on the
Yeah.
one hand, your idea seems to be about right that if, yeah, I mean, it's kind of like everything is possible. If there's nothing, absolute
Exactly.
nothing, everything is
Yes.
possible.
It's almost like
But
it's God.
at the same time, nothing should have no potentiality. So how is there everything possible? How is there even a single thing or anything possible, right?
Yes.
So it's kind
Yeah.
of like a huge
A square
contradiction.
triangle.
Yes.
Yes. It's like a square triangle. Again, the properties conflict. Yeah. Because nothing is supposed to have no potentiality, zero potentiality. But at the same
Right.
time, if it's truly nothing, there's no laws preventing it from being something. And so now we have a bit of a contradiction where nothing seems to be inherently possible to be something because we're thinking there's no laws, whereas and therefore if it has no laws, then it should have infinite possibilities. But if it has infinite possibilities, is that nothing? Then there's at least then there is some laws, arguably there is some rules, which is that it has infinite possibilities. But those two things are in contradiction.
So,
So
so,
as you mentioned,
so
it is absurd.
if this thought is to be entertained, if this thought is to be
Hmm.
entertained, then nothing always exists, and then everything is nothing. Basically, is that could that conclusion be made on the basis of this? But this is absurd. I think when you think about absolutely nothing,
Yeah.
the most fundamental property of this nothing uh,
Hmm.
is there's no property basically.
Yes. Yes.
The
It
very
shouldn't have any
fundamental property of
properties.
nothing is there's no
Yeah.
property at all. I mean,
Yeah.
even when you say it has zero property, you are putting a number on it, and uh, that probably describes something about it, and then it becomes not nothing.
Maybe
This
so.
at
Maybe
least is
so.
how
Yeah.
I'm thinking.
Yeah. And obviously, statements like 2 + 2 = 4 wouldn't exist. Statements like there's either something or there's nothing wouldn't be true. And it's very hard to conceive a world where that's the case, because arguably, 2 + 2, the truth of 2 + 2 = 4 can't be controverted. It's like
Right.
and we're trying to say that nothing means even absence that. That's not true either. And it's hard to imagine a world where that's not true.
Right. Okay.
Similarly, the laws of logic would be absent. But the very strange thing, if the laws of logic are absent, and not true, then it's possible for nothing to be simultaneously true and false at the same time.
Right, exactly, and that's the point I wanted to get to. Basically,
Yeah.
how do you even get the truth value of a statement whether nothing exists is true or false? If
Hmm.
you're in a universe where there is nothing, you cannot have
Exactly.
this truth statement validated, or
Exactly.
not truth statement, rather this statement validated. You cannot. There's no way for you to confirm whether this statement is true or false, right?
Exactly. Because the laws of logic doesn't apply. If there is no laws of logic, then things are not either true or false. Those things don't apply. So we end up in incoherence, or
Right.
in a very difficult to imagine world.
Yeah,
Um,
it's an. I mean, it's hard to imagine even if you can call it anything because it's an absolute incoherence. But uh, even incoherence doesn't exist in that world basically because
hmm, hmm,
no words
hmm,
exist, no things exist, nothing exists pretty much.
hmm.
No laws of logic exist, no truth values exist, nothing, absolutely nothing.
Exactly. So a lot of people in this situation would probably say that nothing is meaningless or nothing is contradictory, and therefore nothing. the concept of nothing is either ill-defined, because it's probably just a trick of our linguistic artifact. That is, for example, because we are so used to seeing things and stuff and items, we try to imagine the opposite of those things. But perhaps, that what we're trying to imagine is just incoherence. It doesn't make sense. It might be a part of our human condition to try, but we can't. And when we think about it, that maybe our thought experiments show that a true nothingness, absolute nothingness, cannot exist.
Right, exactly. So this is what you just said is what I wanted to get to, our point number 2. And you probably already answered it. Can it really exist, basically? Or is it just a concept? And it's as you just said, it's probably an ill-conceived concept. Maybe, who knows, right? And can it really exist? And if it can't really exist, then probably there has always been something, and you just can't imagine nothing, or you just can't have any concept of nothing. And you will always have something. You always had something, and you will always have something. Is that
Yeah,
true?
perhaps
Do
so.
you
Yeah,
think that's
yeah. Exactly right. A lot of people, for example, do ask a similar question. Um, from that, we're trying to describe a nothing and whether something can come from nothing, and but a similar question is the one that we began with. Why is there something rather than nothing? And they're not the same question. Why is there something rather than nothing is different from can something come from nothing, etc. There are two different
right?
questions, and it
Right.
might just be the case. It might just be the case that there was always something, as you mentioned, and this tendency to think, why is there something rather than nothing? Why should we think that? It seems as though intuitively, like nothing should be the default position, and everything else is eccentric, strange. But maybe nothing is the eccentric thing and the strange one, because look
Right.
around us. The most familiar thing we have to us is that some things exist,
Yeah, I
right?
mean this is exactly what I'm thinking right now,
Yeah.
as you said.
That is the default
Yeah,
position.
yeah.
Why
The
should
default
nothing
position
be the
should have
default
been,
position?
yeah,
Yeah, yeah,
yeah. I mean,
yeah.
default position should have been, there is always something, or something has to always exist. If something doesn't exist, or if nothing exists, that's a bit strange. That's like an anomaly
Hmm.
in a sense.
Hmm. Hmm.
And
Exactly.
so this is kind of, and why I bring this point is because in discussions between those who believe in a god and those probably
Mm.
who don't believe in a god, so atheists,
Mm.
agnostics, or probably even kind of not deists, but mostly in those circles, theists and atheists. So this
Mm.
question always comes up: can something come without a god, right? And then usually their point is, God can do everything, and God brings something from nothing. And the question then arises here as well: can really, if nothing really exists, can God create something from nothing? And that's one of the questions, right? uh,
Yes.
because if you talk about nothing and God
Mm.
exists, then there's no absolute nothing, because in an absolute nothing, even God won't exist, right?
Yes. Yeah.
Because God is a
Um,
part of something. I mean, you have to go inclusive, right? Absolute nothing is absolute nothing.
yeah.
And
Yeah.
if God exists
I,
and God has potentiality, then there is something rather than nothing, right? So even
yeah.
if you go
Exactly.
the theistic way, I mean, if even if you go the theistic way, there always has to be something. I mean, the concept of
Yeah.
nothing goes out of the window here as well, and even if you are a theist, basically.
Exactly. A lot of people ask, just like you said, a lot of people ask this question and then conclude with, there must be a god or something, which can be a respectable answer in many circles. But the thing is, the same question, why is there something rather than nothing, can be applied to that question as well, applied to that fact as well. For example, if you believe
Definitely.
that God, yeah, the God was the prime mover, the initial first cause, and before everything there was a God and only God, and that's an eternal cause, and God was eternally always there. Question is, why does God exist rather than nothing? And you can ask that question.
Right, and that's a very valid question. I mean, people say
Yeah,
no, and so all the problems that we are talking about, nothing as a concept can be applied to when there's something, and that something is a god. Basically, I mean, those
yes, yeah.
all all the problems are pushed back just one level in a sense, if you can.
Absolutely, absolutely, yeah. So it doesn't that question of something rather why is there something instead of nothing is a universally mind-numbing, puzzling question. It's not something that religious believers or theists have like a particular advantage over non-religious believers, because that question can be continued to ask each time. In fact, whatever you answer with the question to the question, why is there something rather than nothing? Whatever answer that you give, you can always ask, why does that thing exist rather than nothing? And
Right,
then they may ask to put another explanation, and then you can say, why does that thing exist to an infinite
right.
regress?
And it's
And
an infinite, yeah. It's a conundrum
yes,
basically.
exactly. And even if you try to stop the regress with like an eternal cause, you can always ask, why does that eternal cause exist? Why should there be anything? Why does an eternal thing exist? Why couldn't there just not be nothing in its absence?
Right.
So that question, yeah, it cuts all ideologies, all answers. Sorry, all
All
schools of thought.
belief
Yeah, all
systems
beliefs and
basically.
so on. Yes, yeah, yeah.
Okay, Mahdin, let's talk about point three, and probably we
Mm-hmm,
already touched upon this point number three, but
mm-hmm,
we'll briefly go through it again and see where we are at, and that's about what can be known about nothing or nothingness, and does it have any attributes and properties, basically,
I think
and
we did touch upon that already, didn't we? Like,
yeah, we did touch upon it already,
yeah,
right? So
yeah,
it in essence, in an absolute nothingness, basically, it should not have any attributes, it should not have any properties, any
yes,
property, any abstract property, any abstract attribute,
mm,
if introduced to this nothing, it doesn't remain an absolute nothing. And as
mm,
soon as these properties or attributes are introduced, that potentially means, and potentially I'm saying because that creates a potentiality into this nothingness, right? uh,
mm,
even if even if a logical truth value is introduced within this nothingness, it becomes something, basically. So it shouldn't have any properties, it shouldn't have any attributes, so to speak. Now about,
yes.
do you want to add something to this?
No, I think we clarified that in the beginning. I know some of these questions, we might just answer some, because we're both passionate about it, and we end up getting caught up in the what we're discussing, and we may have answered it before the question became
Yeah.
relevant. I think we have answered that. I completely accept what you're saying there. Nothingness would be the total absence of everything, including concrete objects and abstract objects, any laws, any properties, any attributes. It doesn't have anything, um, and that seems to be hard to conceive. I think that's something that might not exist. But I do want to qualify something here. We are, for example, whether you believe in evolution, that we evolved on a Earth to survive, and we have limits to our brains, etc. Or you might believe in a theistic evolution where God designed us through evolution, and we have brain and cognitive limitations. Or even if you believe that God put us on Earth without evolution,
Just like we are, right? Just like we
yeah,
are, right? Right.
yeah, we have cognitive limits. Even theists believe, there are mysterious questions lurking that we can't answer. Our brains are not powerful enough to answer. It could very well be that some questions like this, where our brains are not capable of answering. You know, um, for example, just like we can't imagine four-dimensional space.
Right.
Yeah, just like we can't imagine, let's say, a tesseract, which is like another four-dimensional sort of structure,
Right.
or weird geometries. Apparently there are non-Euclidean, geometries, and it's hard to imagine, but mathematically it's fine.
Right.
It's very possible that what we're trying to do is, from our armchair, sit down and try and contemplate these deep matters, we're using a very limited brain. Yeah, and the real answers are just beyond our reach. Maybe it's a form of human hubris to think we can answer those questions. Maybe a nothing can exist, and we've just caught up in definitions and words just because our brains can't imagine it, just like we can't imagine four-dimensional space. Yes?
Right.
So I just wanted to highlight, to emphasize a sense of intellectual humility here, that although we are philosophizing, there is a great deal of work within philosophy, attacking philosophy and philosophers who do this sort of armchair thinking. So I want to qualify that a little bit and say, not to get too caught up on it. And if science one day, for example, or mathematics figure out a way to figure out a nothing, then we should go with that. Empiricism should settle the matter. But at this moment, at least, a priori, it seems as though from our armchairs, nothing is nonsensical.
Right. That's true.
Yeah.
Okay, let's see. The number 4 point is, we again touched this point number 4. Can something arise from nothing, and can it be subjected to scientific investigation? And we probably touched on it a little bit, that any observer effect is gonna nullify that nothingness in itself, basically. So there's no way to investigate itself, right? I mean, the moment you put a probe to it, basically you are gonna lose nothingness. And so you can, at least from my perspective, from what I see, I don't think it can be subjected to any scientific investigation or any. There's no way to know whether the absolute nothingness can really exist or not exist, basically.
Yeah. And if we think nothing can't exist, then the question, can something arise from nothing, is subsequently also not possible, because if we think nothing can't exist, then the idea of something arising from a nonsensical state is not possible in the first place, So it renders the second question, that question, void, basically. It doesn't apply anymore.
It's a non-question. It becomes a non-question in a sense, because then because it's it's not a possibility at all.
Exactly. I mean, and even trying to imagine that, if you try to imagine nothing producing something, then the question is, was it really nothing? Because it had the potential to allow for something to come, and remember, nothing has no potentiality. So arguably, if nothing has no potentiality, something can't arise from it. Yeah, but then if something can't arise from it, then nothing seems to have a law preventing things from arising. But if it prevents things from arising, then it's not nothing. Either way, we end up in nonsense.
It's a nonsensical, right? I mean, that's a non-question in a sense. It's a contradiction in itself, basically. It just can't happen, because either you're contradicting the nothingness of nothing, or you're contradicting the something that's arising from that, because something can't really arise because it doesn't have any property, that it doesn't have any potentiality to give rise to anything.
Yes. Exactly. Yeah. What I would say, though, I think the physicist Lawrence Krauss has also posited that in his book, A Universe from Nothing, can something arise from nothing? And he thinks that the universe did come from nothing. However, I just want to caveat that by saying that his version of nothing isn't the philosophical absolute nothingness, devoid of all things and properties and attributes. He's referring to some sort of quantum field that virtual particles or something. Look, I don't know the physics properly, so I might be
Right, right.
misrepresenting
He's
it.
talking about
But
the
yeah,
quantum field, some kind of
yes.
field basically where I mean, sorry to interject you, Mahdin,
No, no,
but
no,
yeah,
it's
I
fine.
mean, his point is basically quantum particles come and go out of this quantum field randomly,
Mm-hmm.
and that's
Mm-hmm.
kind of something from nothing. So these ideas he has expressed in his book. I think what's the name of the book? I'm trying to
A universe
figure
from
it out.
nothing. Yeah. A universe from
A
nothing, I
universe
think.
from nothing, right? A universe
Yeah.
from nothing, right? Right.
Yeah. Yeah, but it's not the type of nothing that we're talking about. But what I want to emphasize is that perhaps that is the most practical definition of nothing. Maybe this philosophical nothing is just imagine our crazy human imagination trying to, trying to imagine something like Dorothy from Wizard of Oz. It's just not, um, or we're trying to imagine something that is part of our spooky imagination. But the real practical definition, practical nothing, is the type of nothing that we have when we remove all space and time and just have a quantum field. That's the closest we can get to nothing, perhaps. So maybe we need to re-describe that as almost nothing or relative nothing, yeah, or the
Right,
highest
right,
version of nothing, the
right.
most practical version of nothing. Is it philosophical nothing? No, but it's the most practical or highest, closest approximation to reaching nothing that's
Nothing,
possible.
right, right.
Yeah,
But
and
but then
yeah,
it still has some potentiality. Basically,
exactly,
it's not
exactly.
devoid of potentiality.
Yeah, yeah. But maybe as we go into the future, that is what science would concern itself with. But I'm sure philosophers would be thinking, why does a quantum field exist rather than nothing? And
Right.
that's where we start thinking like that again. Hopefully, our listeners would probably think that is just either an unanswerable question or that is not a state that is even possible. It's contradictory, like a square triangle or a married bachelor. You know?
Right, right.
Yeah.
I think one thing you clarified, and I think we are both guilty of it. I'm not quite sure if we did that. The kind of the initial in the beginning that we gave a definition of nothing or nothingness. I
Mm.
think I wanted to classify in three stages. One was I think we already did. So forgive
Okay.
me, our audience, that if we did.
Mm.
One was the colloquial language definition or the colloquial definition. The second was
Yes.
what we discussed right now, the scientific definition, and the third is
Mm.
philosophical. So they are kind of in a increasing level of difficulty. In a sense, one is colloquial, is pretty easy to define. Uh,
Yes.
Scientific is comparatively a slight bit more esoteric, and then you have
Yes.
philosophical definition, which is like completely esoteric, and you just have no clue as to exactly how to define it,
Yes.
basically.
Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah.
Right. And I got the name of the book, Mahdin, and the book is called A Universe from Nothing.
Yeah.
Why is there something rather than nothing? That's the
Yes.
book, and that's where Lawrence Krauss discusses something from nothing, basically. And for his scientific purposes, that nothing is not absolutely nothing, as in philosophical nothing, but it's
Mm.
scientific nothing where you may still have some random quantum fields which can give rise to random quantum particles and stuff like that, which could make up the
Yes.
whole universe, which are indeed the makeup of our universe if you look at the very fundamental level.
Yep. That's
Okay.
right. Yeah.
You want to add to something to this, or shall we move on to our last point? And last point,
No.
Madan, I wanted to ask you was kind of I'm not quite sure, and I think probably you'd agree to that. Is that point is something of a random thought in my head,
Mm.
and I wasn't too sure whether I should include this or not. And I thought at
Mm.
least let's put it. This might just be an absurd idea in itself, and I might be completely wrong. So, does lack of nothingness imply necessitarianism, or is that an absurd thought in itself? And I think we touched upon it briefly, and
Mm.
I told you that if nothing can't exist, then we are in a world which necessarily exists, right? Or the
Yeah. I think if our armchair abilities to, you know, get to the truth works, a priori reasoning, yeah,
Mhm.
in the way philosophers do and try to conceive of nothing and then discover that it's nonsensical, contradictory, like a married bachelor, then you'd be right that something must have always existed, because nothing nothing is an impossible state of being, yeah? Nothing
Right.
can't be. And if that's the case, something must have always existed. And it does imply that if something must have existed, that it's a necessary sort of truth. It
Existence.
can't be. Yeah, necessary existence. Um, a lot of people here would probably think then, like maybe there's a deity that exists necessarily, but it doesn't necessitate that. Of course, for example, it could just be that the quantum field that Lawrence Krauss talks about necessarily always existed.
Right.
It could be
Exactly.
other physical and natural causes that we've not discovered yet that necessarily
Yeah,
existed.
it could
Yeah.
be anything. It could be, I mean, say it colloquially, it could be an infinite
Mm.
number of things that could be
Absolutely.
that could have existed prior to it, or maybe even to get to these quantum fields, we may have
Mm.
infinite many different stages of the universe or cosmos
Yeah.
to speak pretty much, and
Yeah.
we won't probably even know what all those things are. Uh,
Yeah.
we
It
just
could
don't
very
have
well be that
the
the
cognitive
universe
abilities.
necessarily exists, an eternal universe, and there's many physical models. Cosmologists would know better, and I don't think we should talk about them specifically. But there are lots of, eternal universe models that exist, that are on the books, that are given a high, significant recognition within the physics and cosmology community and so on, that cannot be dismissed as possibly true. And it could very well be that that our armchair speculations
Mhm.
um, are, are suggesting that maybe one of those physical models are likely to be true. Of course, it could also mean there's a God exists, But keep in mind, what we want to emphasize is that we need to be neutral and open-minded. What is the argument that it should only be a God? Why should there be an agent or a mind that just is the something that exists? In fact, when we look through the telescope of physics, all we find is natural causes. The physical universe consists of cause and effect of particles and so on. That seems to be a more of a candidate to explain um, an eternal existence of something
Right, right.
than a god
I mean,
than a
but
god right
but
now. Because yeah, go on.
sorry, Madin, but you
Yeah.
raised a good point, and I wanted to just emphasize that point and to the
Mm.
audience that if a God exists, I mean, there is a possibility, right? I mean,
Yeah.
if you're honest about these discussions, if we are honest about these discussions, we should keep
Mm-hmm.
that as a possibility. We shouldn't dismiss that possibility at all. But
Mm-hmm.
the 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 reality we have to see is how much it is possible, in a sense, as an a priori possibility of that being existing. So and you made a really good point about these. Most of the causes that we see in the world or in the universe around us, we see those causes as natural causes. So that implies that natural causes a priori are more probabilistically, what do you say, more probable than some
Yeah.
supernatural being who happens to be a personal being, right?
Exactly.
But at least
Um,
you can't dismiss that probability being zero. Pretty much, you have to take that,
Absolutely.
even if it's very
Yeah.
minimal. You'll still have to take that as
Yes.
a probability.
I mean, maybe we'll probably do another podcast stream about the concept of a supernatural being, and because just like nothing, that might have issues as well in terms of conceiving it. You know,
Right.
so in that sense, we might be able to reduce its probability, because arguably concept of a supernatural sort of mind has its own issues, but we can discuss that on another stream. But yeah, in principle, it's obviously possible, but that's one out of an infinite number of possibilities, including unexplored ones and unseen ones, unheard of ones. And like you just reiterated what I said, most of the causes are natural, physical causes in space time, or like quantum fluctuations. They're basically they're causes without agency. They're not minds like a god or a
Right.
being.
Exactly.
They're like mechanical causes, and most of the causes in the universe are like that. But somebody might make the argument, for example, that's not representative, right? If it's truly the case that we've not seen everything and there's undiscovered things outside, maybe, how could we make the
we,
claim
we,
that?
we can't discount them. They'll be right in
Yeah,
their objection, but we'll have to
yeah,
make that point that we are not discounting that fact, but we are
hmm,
speaking in terms of probabilities, or
yes,
probabilistically speaking, basically. So which is
yeah,
more probable, basically, is the question, right?
exactly. I mean, if for example, every single sheep that you've seen is white and only a few are black, yeah, most likely when the next sheep that you're going to see is going to be white. Yeah,
Right.
because there's a statistical pattern from past history and our background knowledge that most sheep are white.
Right. Right.
Although we have the exceptional black sheep, it's not very commonplace, let's say. Similarly, we can apply that to the universe. Um, every single cause in the universe tends to be,
Naturalistic.
yeah, a mechanistic, non-mind, non-mental, natural cause. And the few
Right.
causes that are mental are to do with our own brains that we know of. The rest of
Right.
it and everything throughout the entirety of the huge universe is mechanistic all the way down. So what's more likely, that the next cause that we find, if it has to be an eternal cause, is a mechanical eternal cause, or is it a supernatural mental cause that we've never seen before? Well, we're very familiar with the mechanical natural causes one after another. So why would we see this random surprise that there's a like a disembodied supernatural
There's a
mind at the
one
bottom?
off.
Yeah,
There's one
yeah,
off non-natural
yeah,
cause, but everything else is natural. So I think we'll discuss
yeah.
this in a separate stream. It makes sense to
Yes, it does.
do a separate
Yeah,
stream for that, right?
yeah,
We
yeah,
have plenty of very interesting topics. I think one of the streams we should. I think before I go venture into different topics, let's conclude this stream over here, at least the topic, and then we'll discuss what next streams we could do, and interesting topics we could cover, right? So one of the topics is probably this, as you spoke about, the nature of a personal being, or a creator being, a supernatural being, however you want to
mhm,
call it, right?
mhm,
And
mhm,
more, this probably could be, we could take it as a more of a deistic kind of a supernatural being, or maybe even
mhm.
some sort of theistic kind of a supernatural being. We can cover
Yeah,
both of them, or maybe cover them in separate streams. That's
yeah,
always a possibility. One
yes,
more topic that intrigues me, and I'm pretty sure it intrigues you as well, uh, is the topic of infinities, right? Because
yes, yeah,
most of the times most of the times when we speak about the universe or the existence and all those things, somehow or the other, infinities do appear in those discussions, basically, right?
hmm, hmm,
So
yes,
we'll have to do a stream to talk about infinities as well. Maybe
sure,
whether it happens with respect to a supernatural being, or whether it happens along with Kalam cosmological argument, or whether it happens with fine tuning arguments, or any other sort of arguments. I'm pretty sure we're gonna enjoy that stream. Pretty, yeah, I mean,
absolutely,
it's a topic uh, which is, again, it's a funky topic. It's a very abstract topic, in a sense, basically, because there's no consensus whether um, at least in the mathematics community or scientific community, whether infinities can exist in
Hmm.
reality or not. But I think I'm going too far with this. Do you have any thoughts on anything else? I think we should conclude this stream over here. If you think we have missed anything,
No, I think we covered some of the main issues. Everything else is a bit more peripheral. Right now, I think everything, the core issues have been covered. In terms of upcoming streams, I completely agree with you. Those seem like interesting questions and relevant to what we just discussed here. Maybe we should discuss the concept of a mind and supernatural cause and infinities, because we kind of touched upon it here a little bit as well. So it seems like a natural evolution from this talk. But other things that we could cover as well. I mean, I've been thinking about it's like design arguments. You know, the argument from design. Um,
right,
uh,
ontological argument, and
yeah,
then Kalam cosmology.
yeah, yeah. Because I mean, I think we didn't completely declare to our audience that we would be focusing quite a bit on philosophy of religion, and
Exactly.
trying to evaluate it from a neutral perspective as much as possible. We do have skeptical leanings in one direction or the other,
Right.
but we also want to be as neutral as possible and try and entertain different perspectives. And even if we conclude what seems more likely than the other, we want to give fair treatment to all arguments as unbiasedly and non-prejudicially as possible. I know that's
Right.
not possible entirely, but we'll try.
Right. I totally
Yeah.
agree, wholeheartedly agree to your point. And
Mhm.
uh, it's really gonna be hard to be completely neutral, but
Mhm.
we'll strive for that basically. And but it would be injustice if we didn't disclose our leanings. And as you rightly said, our leanings are towards more skepticism rather than towards any sort of those kind of beliefs. So
Yes.
let that point be pretty open out there.
Yes. Yeah.
All right, then shall we then stop the stream? Will be will will close the stream over here, right?
Yeah, thanks for the discussion, Philo. I really enjoyed it, and hopefully our audience will too. It is a bit, very, very technical to some extent. So I think if our audience thinks we went, a bit too 100, went 150 miles per hour into the topic, and we need to break it down a little bit more, slow it down, or be a bit more clear, we would like feedback. This is something that we've just started, and hopefully we will adapt and learn and grow as we go forward.
Yeah, yeah, I agree to your point. I agree with you on the all the points you made. We would like feedback, any criticism you may have. A positive, constructive criticism is always welcome, and we'll definitely try to improve. This is our first stream, and I'm pretty sure we made quite a few mistakes here and there. Would like to correct those mistakes as we come up with more and more streams. Definitely, we'll definitely get better. I would say. So thank you, everybody. Thanks, Mahdin,
Thank you.
for being a co-host on the stream, first stream, and I hope we'll do many more streams together.
Me
Thanks,
too. Me
everybody.
too, Peter. Okay.
All right, bye bye.
All right.